Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Writers Drinking Whiskey. I'm your semi-drunk, always belligerent host, William R. Hincy, and I'm here today with Dan Conover. Dan, and I believe, let me make sure I catch this because I did note it on your website here. The current work is being written under the pseudonym of DC McElroy.
That's right.
Beautiful. Dan, I'm jazzed to have you here. Welcome to the bar.
Thanks, man. I'm honored to be here, and it was great meeting you in Buford.
It was. Buford was a great time. Anyone that hasn't been, I go from the West Coast over there, which isn't always the easiest trip because God knows there's no direct flights convenient. But it is a beautiful, beautiful area. South Carolina is underrated.
Well, that's one way of putting it. Undereducated is another. But yeah, I'm it's home.
Right. Yeah, beautiful. So if you could maybe just take a minute and introduce yourself to the audience, like what you've written, your past. It doesn't have to just be writing related, but
yeah, sure. So anyway, I'm a kid that grew up in North Carolina. Hippie kid, hippie parents, who started a commune that then fell apart. So I was the kid in my high school who lived by himself, who lived on his own, which made my place like a really destination spot. See,
right, you were popular in high school.
I was popular because no parents, but anyway, I a lot of people have, they suffer from not knowing what they want to do with their lives, and I've suffered from having, from knowing what I wanted to do since I was 14. I always knew this is what I wanted to do. But, also kind of a, poor kid growing up in Carolina, you understand that you got to be able to afford that. And so, my solution wound up being to become a newspaper guy. And I was in college for a while till Reagan cut the Pell Grant, and then I wasn't in college anymore. And I did 4 years in the Armored Cav, and that paid for my education. I got my journalism degree at University of North Carolina, and I did about 20 years in the news business in the Carolinas. Met my wife, Janet, my second wife, in the newsroom at the Charleston Post and Courier. I was the city editor. She was the design editor, and it's not exactly meet cute, but it was, I got that out of my career anyway. And
right.
We raised 4 kids, and in basically had to struggle for the last 10 years before we moved here because the newspaper industry fell apart, and sure, we had to hustle to pay the bills. And in 2016, my wife comes to me and says, how about this? How about we sell this Charleston house and we move up to the upstate, which is the Appalachian foothills portion of South Carolina, and live in this unoccupied trailer on my family's ancestral farm. And by doing that, we were able to pay off all our debts, really lower our expenses, and we have our own business, and we had a bunch of clients back then, but it was a way to actually have some time to put towards doing what we'd always wanted to do, which was write books. And in her case, she's a graphic designer, and she really wanted to branch out into fine art. So that's what we've been doing. And 6 years later, I'm finishing my 5th book under the made-up name DC McElroy, and living large, thriftily. Is that a word? Because we have everything except cash, but it's fine. We're on beautiful little piece of property that we about 33 acres that we keep up, and look better, and so that's
right. Yeah, that sounds amazing. What's funny, there's parallels there because I met my wife, worked at Medtronic. There's a huge biotech firm like Johnson & Johnson and things. Yeah. And we were working there. She's a nurse, and I went on to have this sordid corporate career. And we met there, and we had actually double dated. She was married. I think it was before she was married to her first husband, Johnny, but me and her double dated with my ex-girlfriend and things at the time. And we get to just be super close friends. And when those relationships ended much later, after, then it became romantic very slowly. I thought we were dating like months before she did. It's still like an argument with us. She's like, oh, that wasn't our first date. Our first date was like years later. And I'm like, wow, I had no idea. But and then we had the 4 kids. I had 2 kids I wasn't married before her, but 2 kids previous relationship. She had a daughter with her first husband, and then we had our son. And so we had the 4 kids, and then
I had the foresight like you to have only the 1 kid, but then I married 3 more, and I don't regret it for a day, but there were days, right?
Right. You even regret all the ones you have. If you have 1, there's going to be days where you're like, why did I do this again?
Yes.
It was a little harder than I anticipated.
You can curse them in plural terms when instead of making it really personal to any one of them. It's just like, oh, listen here, you little fuckers.
Right. All right. So what are we drinking tonight?
Well, we're to that part of it. So so this is a drink of my own invention. And do you want to hear the story about that, or
Absolutely.
So basically, when we got up here, the place was a wreck, and my wife and I we had a lot of physical labor that had to get done, and sometimes we'd be working next to each other, and sometimes we wouldn't see each other all day, and we'd like get back here hot and exhausted. And we have this workshop. I'm just telling you, I love this workshop. I love having a place where I can fix stuff. This workshop is part of what's called a pole barn. I don't know if you're familiar with that phrase, but it's like a non-enclosed barn. This part is. You can pull a car in here to work on it, but the rest of it is just kind of an open, very large space under a slanted roof. And we would have our happy hour there, and we would drink beer. And it doesn't take too long to realize, when the price of beer is going up, that 2 people sitting down and like killing a 6-pack together, that gets expensive pretty quickly, even with cheap beer. So, and also, I'm at that age where, the beer doesn't just go through me, it tends to hang around. So I mean, quite so hot, so calorific. So anyway, this is called a Dan drink, not named by me. It was named by my so-called girlfriend. My wife calls her my so-called girlfriend, a good friend of ours, sits up here a lot. And one night I was drinking one of these, and we were drinking and talking here, and she says, will you make me a drink? And Janet says, well, what kind of drink? She says, well, not a Dan drink, right? Because I don't know. So this is the beginning of a Dan drink. You need one of these big tumblers, right? So you start with that. And then the next thing that you need is some kind of brown liquor. And if you don't have brown liquor, then what you can use is anything else. So in this case, you put in a certain amount, which really depends on just how bad the day was. And the point of this is that it winds up being considerably cheaper if what you're trying to do is not so much have a fine cocktail, but just sort of sit at the end of the day and drink socially. One of the things I really like about it is that you get to control just how much liquor goes into it. And so when we're sitting around here, we have a fire pit out here underneath the pole barn and a couple of other places. And when people come out to visit and we're sitting around, I can start off with a nice one, and then, with a good amount of alcohol in it, and then just keep cutting back on that. Or I can screw up badly and just keep pouring them strong, which is which is
what I do most of the time.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to get better about it. I hate those mornings when I wake up and I'm like, okay, I have questions about what happened last night. So this is basically just Evan Williams Black Label, which is one of the better cheap bourbons that you can get. It's my weapon of choice. And then there's a soda or ginger ale, either one. I don't care. Really just mood. And what are you drinking?
I am drinking. So I'm going to show an empty bottle, but I'll show the decanter it's in. But I want people to be able to see it. So if it shows up, okay, it's Jefferson's Ocean. It's a bourbon. Jefferson's the company. Ocean. They aged this one on the ocean. So they put the whiskey barrels on a ship, and it just goes around the world. So it's sloshing around. It goes through storms, hot, cold, everything else. And it's it's really smooth. I like Jefferson, the regular bourbon's good, but this one, it's really smooth. It's really nice flavor to it. So I'm just going to be sipping on that this afternoon because I wanted to. My wife got me this for Christmas. It's ice here. So you put this little black mold in, and I can take that mold off. And it makes basically half the glass, like that diagonal there, is ice. So it doesn't melt.
She's going to want one.
Oh, you should get one. Yeah, yeah. I'll send you the link. I'll put the link on the show here as well. But
yeah, so my wife, on the other end, so part of our little dynamic is that I'll drink the cheap stuff because, you know, look at me. But she, on the other hand, went to Scotland recently and came back Scottish, and you know, she just loves single malt, and you know, obviously it's a thing, it's a expensive thing, but right. You know, we still buy it for her, and occasionally I'll have one. Her thing right now is the Sexton. Have you tried? It's not a Scottish single malt. It's an Irish whiskey called the Sexton.
Sexton. I don't think I've tried it.
It's okay. Good. It's got a really weird bottle, which I think is kind of an affectation, but it's actually a very nice, reasonably priced brown.
Wait, is that no the one I have? I have this one. Here's my departure. When you said that, it reminded me of this Irish whiskey I picked up the other day. It's like Shankies or something, but it has this very strange. And I picked it just the artwork. I saw it, and I'm like, beautiful. That. Yeah, I'm like, that looks so ridiculous. I'm gonna try that out.
I think a lot of people buy the Sexton because it's got this strain with a skeleton with a skull kind of motif on it. But it's yeah, but it's not a gimmick. It's legit.
That's good. All right. Well, cheers, my friend.
Cheers to you.
All right. So I think we covered where in the world you are. So you're in South Carolina now on the farm. So that's awesome. So I was born in Morgantown. So I was a Air Force brat. To a degree, my dad was out. I was about 7, but before that, you know, he was going to WVU. That's why I was born there. And then we bounced around. We were in Omaha because there's an Air Force base there. And then he was doing something with satellites or something. And so we out in El Segundo, which is where, right? What's that?
Uffett Field?
I believe so. Yeah. I think that is the name of it there. Yeah. And that's my earliest memories actually is Nebraska. But so we came out here, but I love it. Like anytime I go back, especially because I'm a Steelers fan, because they were the Panhandle of West Virginia, so it was 40 minutes from Pittsburgh. But so it's beautiful. I think one of the misconceptions I was like, oh, you know, Appalachia, this, that. I'm like, it is so beautiful. You don't realize when you go, especially in the fall when you're out there and the leaves are changing. So what would you say? What's a misconception about the Appalachia area in general?
That we're all cousins. My parents are from here. We're not all cousins. Really not first cousin. Sorry.
Second cousin doesn't count.
I moved to so when I got to go to college the first time around, I went to Appalachian State in Boone, and I had a great, I mean, that was where my real education took place, was you know, 2 years there basically, in a great program. And then the money ran out, and so I went on. Since then, I've always loved this region, and my first job after the Army in newspapers was a reporting job in a place called Waynesville, which is about 20 minutes west of Asheville. And so that's where my son Luke was born. And it actually went, he and his wife now live in Black Mountain, which is just on the other side of Asheville. And they, the reason that they got the rental that they got was because he was like, oh yeah, I'm from Haywood County. And they're like, you're one of us, son, come on in. Ask, well, is your daddy one of us? Because daddy's not, right? Daddy I was actually born in Chicago, but grew up in North Carolina, Piedmont, North Carolina. The Appalachian people are, I don't know if you've ever heard of a guy named Horace Kephart. He was a fascinating guy who wrote a book called Our Southern Highlanders that came out in the early 20th century. And at that time, that's where a lot of our stereotypes about Appalachian people come from.
Sure.
And they were well founded. The change that has taken place is pretty remarkable, but it remains a really, compared to the rest of the country, it's a pretty depressed region. And we live actually very close. This used to be out in the country, and now we're really surrounded by suburbia in this little, our spread. And
sure.
most of the people that live here live here and work in Greenville, which is only about half an hour the other way, 20 minutes in some cases. And it's a modern city. It didn't used to be when I was a kid growing up. But today, I mean, it's changed, and yet we remain stuck in some of in some ways the South has gone backwards. But that's another question that's a larger
right. Yeah, very cool. You know what what strikes me anytime I talk about it, because I'm the novel I've been working on since like the beginning of time.
Pirates
Pirates of Appalachia, right? Yeah. So, and it's about these bootleggers, and it's an epic absurdist satire. It's wild as it's out there. And it's these bootlegging pirates that decide they're sailing down the Ohio and they're gonna sack the city of Pittsburgh in this kind of weird near-term future. And so I say that sometimes, and I think people think like, oh, I'm bagging on Appalachia, but to me, it's like I love it. But I don't feel like I get to say I'm Appalachian. Like I actually don't feel like I get to say I'm anything. Like I don't feel like I'm from a place or from a people. I'm a huge mutt as well, right? And sometimes I'll say that to like my wife or things, and people will think it's sad, but it's actually kind of awesome. Because it's like I get to go to all these parties and I just never have to clean up. like my grandmother's full Italian. Like that side, I think it was her dad that came over from Sicily. And so it's like when I'm with them, it's like, oh, I get to like this Italian family and it's fun. I don't get to see them enough because they're all on the East Coast, but when we do get to go out there, it's amazing. The food's amazing. And then it's like, okay, well, now I'm back out to whatever I'm doing and I don't have to clean up. You guys, good luck with whatever's happening.
Bye, see ya.
Yeah, exactly. So the journalism piece, if we could touch on that for a minute, because I know you were in it there's still journalism to some degree, but it's not, right? Like not like it was. I imagine it must have been almost like being around like when the Roman Empire is falling, right? It's like there's still pieces of it there, but it's nothing like what it was.
Right, but it's unrecognizable in terms of what it was. That is not to say that there isn't good journalism going on. That's clearly happening, right? One thing to know is that I'm not going to get into all the background, but I was an early media blogger writing about when I was, and this was, my newspaper didn't want anybody having an opinion in public, right? So it was a kind of a dicey thing for me to be writing about media and new media on a blog while I was, working in the features department. But they were so not connected to anything digital that no one noticed. So I got away.
Sure. Right.
And the thing that was, that brought me into that was I was really alarmed by the way things were going. I mean, truly frightened. Because I could see that the industry was collapsing. The big issue, of course, was that the digital platforms just didn't have advertising monopolies, and as a result, you just couldn't. It didn't work as a subsidy for information anymore. And I was kind of afraid that what I was seeing from Fox News and whatever was eventually going to kind of overrun our ability to, do journalism, particularly on a local level. And that's what I think that's what we've really seen is that it's the local journalism that's been destroyed. So the paper that I work for dreamed of being the largest newspaper in South Carolina and never was. And now it is by default because the other ones, they were the Post and Courier is privately owned. So they didn't have a board, worrying about, the next quarterly profit.
Right.
And so as a result, they didn't shrink as much as the others. Plus they were in a place that was growing very rapidly. Charleston area is now huge. But, when I went to work there, the newsroom had like 120 something people in it, and the circulation was well over 100,000. And it was, that was a normal status quo. Today, I don't remember what it is, but it's, real circulation is going to be a tiny fraction of that. And they're doing much better than everyone else.
Sure.
And I think we can just look around and see what that's done to us as a people, is that we have no idea what's going on across the street, but we have a pretty good idea what the latest controversy in the culture war is, because that's everywhere on the national.
Right. Yeah, that's funny. I'm glad you went there, because that was my follow-up question, was that to be, is like, what have we lost, with it? Yeah.
I mean, it is not sexy to do local government reporting. That's what I started off. That's where I, earned my bones, really, was working in small towns, and got this job very early as an editor with the Post and Courier. I don't think that I was ever that great of an editor. I think that newspaper people just loved the fact that here was a guy that was that had been a sergeant in the army. I think they really liked that. Just the idea that somebody would like kick ass and charge.
Drill sergeant, everyone in
that's what it is. It's manly. Well, it's just, I didn't want to do that. I mean, that's a basic skill set, but it wasn't, all I wanted to do was get out of editing, and it took me a long time to do it. I finally managed to do it in my last few years with the paper, and go back to reporting, which is all I'd ever wanted to do in the first place. And my wife and I got stuck in Charleston because we had because we couldn't move. We were a joint custody family, and we put the family ahead of career, which meant that we could not move, which meant that we had to turn down really good offers to stay in Charleston as everything went to hell. And I just wanted to get out of this management business and get back to it. And the fun part was that they finally let me. They made me like work this terrible management job for like a year, and then they let me go. And I got to be like this. I had the perfect job, man. I got to be this this feature reporter who didn't really have a portfolio. What do you want to do? And I'm like, I'm going to write about science. I'm going to write about everything, but I'm going to specialize in science. We had a health and science page that had no science in it, and it's just disease of the week. And I wasn't there doing that for a year, and my newspaper actually nominated me for Journalist of the Year, and I'm like, well, that's cute. And and then none of the stories that I had written that year won any prizes, and I won Journalist of the Year, which should tell you everything you need to know about awards, right? So somebody who writes this whole body of work, not one of which is picked to be awarded anything, a body of work somehow is okay. So anyway, what that did was it showed me that I was okay at what I did. And I'm still and I love that it happened, because it gives me like a thing I can say.
Well, that's the thing with awards, right? It's just a thing you can say.
You belong there.
Right. And I mean, I strictly feel, and I joked for a long time, because I was, I don't want to sound like modest with this. I just really don't remember, but there's like some handful of awards I was a finalist for. Right? It was like the Eric Hoffer Award and International Book Award. I think I'm remembering a couple. That's what I just forget, because it doesn't matter. Like at the end, you need some of it. Right. It kind of gives you that, like, for one, you feel like you belong, which is the nice personal thing. And then two, it gives you some like credits, for, right, have some credentials.
Helpful as shorthand when you're just trying to like walk in the door with somebody that's basically filtering information around the idea of, can I just discard this person, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's shorthand and it's useful. Have you had the experience that whenever there's something that you really, really want and you get there, it just evaporates?
Oh, yeah. That I was talking to my 11-year-old is it's just a super creative kid. And I've never really been, and I don't know if this is just me getting older or not too, but I've never been in a room where I didn't feel like where I felt like someone was more creative than I was. Right. I always felt like any room I was ever been in, I've always felt like I can hang like with what's happening and contribute. But he is so hyper creative that it's like I get tired, and that's why I know I'm 44 now. Maybe I'm just like getting older and like drinking too much, like used to say.
Just getting warmed up.
Right, exactly. But he's super creative, but I was telling him because he really likes to draw and do animations and things like of that sort. And I'm like, when you do something like that, the journey has to be your reward. Right? Writing, very much. The journey has to be a reward, because it's not like I did a lot of theater acting and things. The reward was doing the play, because you got feedback to everything you're doing right at that moment. So I've worked, and then now you get to be in front of an audience and hear them laugh and cheer and whatever it might be. Yeah, we don't get that. Like no matter what it is, right? So it's like art's the same.
The most awkward thing to have to like. I hate it. People. So I'll tell this story. So when we got up here, one of the things that this was a working farm once, and nobody had grown anything on it in years. So the family trust that owns this place had for a long time basically just leased out its fields to someone who came in and would bale hay on them. Sure. I don't think they really made much, if any, money off of that. But what it did was it kept the fields. And then the guy that did that retired, and they just stopped doing anything, and everything went to shit.
Sure.
Yeah, just trying to get it back is a big deal. And I have no idea where I was going with that, but here we are.
Well, that's the great part about this show, is the half-finished stories.
One of the things that I've learned is that the most embarrassing things that I've done in social situations are when I lose my train of thought and then I try to like fake the funk. Like, I actually have a point. And now I'm just like, it's really liberating to just say, nah, I'm old, I forgot.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of my grandfather. My grandmother's still there. My grandfather and grandmother had they have 90 acres, actually on the Pennsylvania side, but like they're 5 minutes from West Virginia. And that was the bane of my grandfather's existence, because the taxes were higher. And he's like, if we were just 5 minutes that way, be in West Virginia, everything would be so much better. And we were out, and he passed away during the pandemic. He gotten COVID and fell, and he was older, he was in his 90s, but so he's not with us anymore. But we had made a point for a while, because my grandparents are getting older, of going out every year and taking the kids, because we're like, we just want to be able to see everyone, get the kids to get like their great grandparents get some memories with them. And unfortunately my son doesn't remember this, but my son and my stepdaughter, my daughter Michaela, we were driving around, my grandfather's driving around the farm, in the truck, and no one had baled the hay in a while. And he just was getting older, so he's had people come do it, but it's kind of like, he's an old farmer. He wanted to be able to do it, right? And so it's like, it's bothering him. And he's like, oh, yeah, you guys want to bale the hay? You can come bale the hay. I'll pay you. You can come work the farm, and I'll pay you riches, Yeah. So my son reaches out, and him and Michaela each get just a little stalk of hay. And I swear they thought they discovered gold. Like, this was the gold rush. They're like, we're gonna pay you.
Oh, I remember what it was. I was talking about this because doing having this commercial market garden. We went to market for 3 years, right? Farmers market, and I sold I sold produce in a variety of ways. What it meant was that when people would say, well, what do you do? I'd say, well, I run a market garden. And we grow organic produce and we sell it at the farmer's market and yada, yada. And they would say, oh, that's a thing. I know what that is, kind of. How good of you for doing something that we know what that is. And the difference between that and being a writer is that as a writer, you know, when you don't have another job that you can point to, they say, well, what do you do? And you say, well, I'm a writer. And that ends the conversation because nobody knows what the hell to say to that, right? It's like the most awkward thing in the world. I'm thinking about coming up with a lie, right? Just for social,
sure.
Because it's like, oh God, that's frightening. What do I say to that?
Right. Yeah. That's funny. I bet you that's the difference between living in California and the shadow of Los Angeles like I am in South Carolina. Because if I tell anyone I'm a writer, my wife noticed this. Because by the time we dated, I already published a bunch of things and you know had nice credits to my name. And she go, why don't you ever tell anyone you're a writer? And I'm like, because if I tell someone I'm a writer, they will ask me what I've written. I will tell them. They never read books, so they're not going to know any of it, right? And then not wildly famous anyway. So like, if you know, they would have to stumble upon me to be into it anyways. And 3 seconds in, though, no matter what happened, they're just going to tell me their great, unfinished, unstarted book.
Or in California, there's screenplay.
Right.
There was a while when I wrote screenplays just because I thought it would be fun, right?
Sure.
And you know, it was the thing. Well, wouldn't it be great if you could get it across? And then you figure out, wow, this is not about screenplays at all. And somebody had. I read this play. I can't source it, but it basically was somebody who like went around in LA and like for like a week, and everybody that he met, he would say, how's the screenplay coming along? And according to his statistics, 75% of them said, well, actually, I feel like I'm making really good progress. And, you know, I've got like somebody, I know a guy. And that's, you know, I've got a little bit of pride, you know, and I didn't want to be that guy, you know.
Sure.
I really didn't. Now I don't have so much pride.
There you go.
I just have to tell the truth. Yeah, I'm a writer. It's not my fault. I'm addicted to typing. Just if I don't write something every day, it doesn't have to be fiction, although that's what I'm doing when I'm doing well. But I really have to write, and I have to write in public. The idea of sitting around just writing for myself. There's nothing wrong with that, but man, that would be really sad if that's what I was doing. So I appreciate the fact that all the other things that are, you know, I don't feel good about with where the world's going. I really appreciate the fact that we can write in public and publish what we want, in a, you know, and that I can make some money off of it. We can use every dollar. So
yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, that's the great point, right? It's the barriers that there used to be, you know, 50 years ago are gone. There's more noise, right? Those barriers being gone means there's more noise and there's this proliferation of things.
More than 1 million books were published in the United States last year. Right. Most of them were published as ebooks. And they have an average readership of 10 maybe. But the terrible secret that nobody really wanted to talk about, at least a few years ago, was that most of the books that were published traditionally never got any readers. I mean, most of them remaindered with, you know, less than 2,000 sales.
Sure.
And, you know, once you figure everybody else takes their cut of that, there's no money.
Yep. So, yeah, I had my first novel. I'm gonna be real for our audience here. I usually don't even tell people the original name. It's still, you can still find copies floating out there, but the first novel I wrote, the original title was The Hordes of Torment, and I published it. If you look it up, you can find the publisher. the Hordes of Torment. And I published it, and I figured out at one point they were selling it for like $17. And after all of the deductions of that $17, I made like $1 a copy.
Sure.
So people like want a copy, and I got like the biggest riches I got from it was the 50 free copies they gave me, which I actually still have some in the closet because it was a horrible experience. The cover was, I hated the cover. Like they didn't even make an ebook, which was weird. But
I knew that you had a bad traditional experience, but I didn't know what it was.
That's a whole episode in itself. How bad that was.
Have you ever heard of a writer named Patricia Anthony? Most people.
I don't think so.
There's a lot of writers out there. Anyway, Patricia became a friend of mine, and I thought her story was a good one. So her first couple of books wound up being prize-winning books and critically acclaimed. She's a science fiction writer. Okay. And so she got a publisher and an agent and all these things. And then she started breaking the boundaries of the genre because that's what she wanted to write.
Yep.
And books got better, but they couldn't figure out how to sell them.
Right.
Couldn't figure out how to market them. And her final published book is called Flanders. And my wife, I've just gotten married. This is 1999, just gotten married. And we moved into a rental. We rented the top 2 floors of a Charleston single house. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's the traditional architecture of Charleston. So we're living this kind of cool, funky life in this top 2 floors with these young kids. And we're right around the street from the library. And we would go to the library every weekend and we'd get books and videos and things. Mystery Science Theater. My kids are all totally warped. And one of them was this book, and I loved it. It made me cry. I loved it so much. I did the thing I never do, and I just wrote this woman an email saying, "Wow!" And it wound up being a friendship that went on. And
very cool.
She died, and the reason that I call what I do slipstream fantasy is because of her, in that she never identified herself as being a science fiction writer. She called herself a slipstream writer, which she defined, I think, a little bit differently than people now define it, right? It's got kind of a pretentious tone to it. All she meant was that, I don't want to write in this narrowly defined genre that is really just a marketing funnel.
Right.
I want to write the books that interest me. And yeah, that's what I want to do. And so the thing with the DC McElroy books, which the series is called the Darbas Cycle, the whole idea was that I'm not even a big fantasy reader myself. I'm not a big fantasy fan. I was a book critic, and it's like a hobby when I was working for the paper for a decade, for more than a decade, and I read a lot of things. And what I saw was that what we think of as being like the literary genre becoming increasingly sort of colonized by kind of I don't want to be, it's not my thing, right? It's not for me.
Sure.
But
it got co-opted by academia, right? Like all the literary stuff became the prestige, and that became all the professors that are writing for other professors.
That's right. And MFA graduates.
MFA,
right?
Yep.
MFA graduates. And I'm not trying to disparage them because they're in a terrible, situation as far as I'm concerned. Right. I wanted to write things that that had literary value, but I didn't want to conform to the literary. I could basically see I don't know if you've ever read Tom Wolfe's book, The Painted Word. It's a very short, it's basically an extended essay where he's just basically talking about how abstract art became the darling of the rich and the educated. Right. And that instead of the painting being about an image that you interacted, you experienced, the painting became an expression of a theory. It's a visual expression of a lengthy theory that some critic has written. And And it's no longer
It's completely inaccessible to anyone that doesn't
it's
know.
no longer for people who aren't part of the club.
Right.
I'm not a theorist. But I think that when we get to a point where artists and writers do what they do with the thought that what they're doing is too good for most people, then we're basically consigning them to nothing but kitsch.
Right.
And right, because we're churning out kitsch with the intent of like shoveling it. It's a commodity. Look at the Hallmark Channel. I'm not trying to bang on the Hallmark Channel for their Christmas movies, but they're a form, right?
Absolutely.
And people, we live in a digital age with spreadsheets, so the bean counters really want to serve up a formula, and I understand why. It's no risk. You're not going to get big payoffs, but you know what to expect.
Right.
Patricia Anthony couldn't have a career because they couldn't figure out how to put her in, what box to put her in. She refused, and I refused.
God bless her.
And
yeah, God bless
a lot
her.
of it's confusing. And I think that whether or not I'm successful commercially, man, it means an awful lot to me when what I do connects with any stranger.
Amen.
That's that. And the other thing is that when you own the rights to your own work, you're creating an asset. Now, the value of that asset may depreciate, right? There's nothing that says that just because you've created a body of work, that body of work is never going to have value.
It may never appreciate, right? Like it may never actually go up, but
it's a long shot. It's absolutely a long shot. But the thing that I'm very aware of is that, number one, I'm not going to, my experiences working since the Great Recession have been basically part of the decline of work in America. It's just, it's a joke. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to, make it a downer, but I don't want to do that anymore. It's only going to marginally improve our situation. We make money a variety of ways, but I'm very attached to the idea that at least by creating an asset that we own, we have a chance that maybe someday it'll pay off. If not for us, pay off for our kids, and I'm going to keep at it.
Sure.
Yeah,
as you should. Yeah, I hope you do. What's what I always find interesting about it, and I completely might be in the minority in this. One of the reasons I think there's so much people that don't read much now, right? They read on their phone and that's it, right? They don't read much books. That's definitely a decline. And then everyone blames that on TV and everything else. And I'm sure there's truth to that. I always feel like part of it is the writing we've been producing, right? You get the academic writing, which they're just catering to each other. It becomes this little incestuous circle. And a lot of my writing was published by academic journals. Most of my stuff gets labeled as literary fiction. So not to disparage them, lots of great people. Charles Hood, professor, published a ton, was one of the few people I would say was a mentor, in my early life. But you get that, and that's not sellable. That's you're just selling to this little crowd, right? You're publishing to keep your job as a professor, right? You publish or die, right? They're just publishing. And then you get the garbage on the other end, and it's the bean counter art. And so
go ahead.
Yeah, and so no one's hitting anything. You're getting so few just new, wildly creative. Like when I'm writing pirates, I was just talking about this the other day with a friend, is that I have two rules that guide me every time I write it. One is it's an epic, absurd satire, and everything I write is to that end.
Yes.
And the other one is unwavering creative audacity.
Yes.
I'm going to be creative, like the character's going to make sense, but I'm just going to go for it. And maybe no one will ever love it. Maybe 5 people will love it. That's actually what I'm hoping for, is that there's just people that connect with it. You used that word earlier, and I'd really responded to it, is when you get someone that it's not, your mom, funny part with me is my family doesn't even read my writing too much. So like,
Yeah. All right.
I'm free.
Number one, I just want to say, you seemed like a nice guy when I met you in Beaufort, but then you read that short story, and I can't remember what it's called, but it's the couple.
Bermuda Triangle. Yeah.
And it was so legit. It was so good. And I'm not generally a fan of short stories. I mean, that's how I started writing short stories, publishing short stories. But that wasn't what I wanted to be. And the thing is, I have found that there are people, that's really what they want to do. That is what they love. And a great short story is a joy. I can't hardly clear my throat without it taking 10 minutes, right? So
right.
Yeah. Anyway, you're legit, man, and I really appreciate you having me on, because
thank you. Thank you. No,
I'd like to have talked to you more while we were there, but it was a room,
It is, yeah. It's one of those things. But we got this time. That's part of the reason I wanted to do this show. These conversations are amazing, and it's like I wanted to share them with other people. Like realize, and I don't want to beat the dead horse, because I've said this on other shows, but my goal with this show is, for one, selfishly, I want to have a good time. Like I want to come on, like get to talk with interesting people and have fun conversations, and and then two, though, is I really want people that watch this to be able to find their next author, not their next read. It's not, oh, this is the next book I want to read. It's, oh no, this is an author, and I want to read everything this author produces, because I know that person is someone that has something meaningful to give the world, and to say, and is interesting, and I just want to follow them along. So and I find myself like I have too many books. I'm not even like a prolific reader. I just keep buying them. I love everybody so much, but I'm like, I don't read enough.
So the thing was, when we left Charleston, we had to liquidate like 10,000 books, because my wife and I, not only did we acquire books on our own, but we were both active book reviewers for a long time. And not only would they give you the high profile books that they wanted you to sign up, and you're going to have to do this, but they also, publishers would send out paperback galleys of things, review copy, and the book editor here would just like spread them out on a table, and you could just take them. So I got to read really widely. And for a while there, I really thought I kind of had a sense of where things were going, and I didn't. But the thing that I found was that for me, I thought that the people that were staying the most narrowly focused on sort of the fashion of whatever literary trend was that month were incomprehensible, and they didn't understand story.
Sure.
They had all the literary values and qualities, but in terms of being able to do some of those very basic things, they just didn't, and they kind of compensated for it, but with flourishes and vague, right? And I suppose if you've been through that training, that vagueness is more specific. But if you're just a common reader,
right? Well, I feel you. I feel like they started to become the abstract art you mentioned earlier.
Yeah,
and you had to know all of the prerequisite background reading, or else you couldn't access it.
And my wife is the fantasy reader in the group, right? And literally one morning I woke up. I woke up one morning. I said, I just had a strange dream. I just told her this dream, and she'd already been advocating fantasy to me for a while. She says, you should write that. That's a fantasy story. And that is literally the genesis of the project that I'm doing now, and that would have been like 2002.
Oh, right? Wow. I wrote 20 years now.
The first novel that I ever finished, I didn't know anything about novels, actually writing them other than just reading them, was that year. I just started publishing my first short stories, a defunct outfit called Phobos, and up in Manhattan, and I wanted to write a novel, and so I wound up writing the one that that came from this dream. It's hard to believe that. And I was city editor at the I was an editor at the time. A little foggy now. That's that far long ago, but I would get up every morning at 4:30, and I had from whenever I could sit down at the computer, everybody else is asleep, I could write until I had to go into the newsroom around. I had to be there around 10 because I was going to be there for 10 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I got that book done in. I started on January 1st and I finished on June 30th. And it was like almost 300,000 words. I had no clue what that was.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
And eventually, I wound up years later turning that into 2 books and publishing them. And that was my first experience with ebooks and trying to sell myself. And I was clueless, and I could not reach an audience. Very frustrating. But when I came back around the next time, I think I've said, I really wanted to be traditionally published. I really wanted it
for
the validation, right? To be able to say. And when I was doing this the first time, way back when they wouldn't even take email submissions, right? So you had to print everything out, put it in a box, and send it off to somebody you didn't even know who they were.
Mm-hmm.
I got better.
The dreaded slush pile.
Yeah.
I used to call it, right?
I got great. I mean, I got letters back from people, talking about what they liked and didn't like, right? And now we have this situation where you've got like agent wish lists on Twitter and all these things where, hey, this is what I wish I had coming in my box, and it's just like all this information about agents and what they want, and yada yada. And when you do submit, so I spent a year. I wasted a year submitting to agents when I had the first book in this series, and I got almost no response. I think I don't know that I got a response that was personal.
Right.
And I thought, wow. And the other thing that I noticed was how many agents were on my list that I'd compiled from like looking through all the resources, who by the time I got to them had left the business, because I think it's very difficult on them right now too. I think they're in hell. But what I love is the idea of owning the rights to my own work, so I don't have that experience that you had. And I'll say this: one of the things that happened was I got rejected on the books that the first 2 books that I wrote that were part of this Darbas world, and so I published them in 2013, and a few people found them and loved them, and that was great. People I didn't know, and they like wrote to me and they're like, I love this thing, but you couldn't go to dinner on those things at a nice restaurant.
Right.
And so I was convinced I wasn't going to drop it. I mean, I probably should have, but I'm like, no, I think I love this little world, and I love this idea. And so the next thing I thought was, I'm going to write a preview. I'm going to write a prequel novel. And again, I didn't understand what novels really were, right? That the idea that I had, this plot that I had, was way too long it was way too complicated for one thing. And so I'm like, I'm actually writing a trilogy, right? I didn't know it, right? Because I've spent my life, doing 1,200 word columns and articles and things, and now trying to learn a new form, because it's a craft, and that's how this came to be, right? So what's going to happen eventually? I'm finishing up. Let me just pause for a minute and say, because I know we've gone way off track. Do you want to wrangle me back in, or is this going smart?
No. This is the show, Dan. Right. Like when I loved your structure. It was so smart. Anyway,
Yeah.
But
So
people at a bar go on tangents,
yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
what we're doing. That's the whole show.
So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to write this prequel trilogy to the first book that I had written, that I broke into 2 books and then published. And I love doing that so much. I love the form of writing in a trilogy so much. And I thought, wow. So what I need to do is I need to take those 2 books. I can pull them back. I own the rights.
Right.
I pulled them off of Amazon. You can't buy them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, so the next thing I'll do after I finish this trilogy, I'm going to write through those 2 books and add some material that, I considered putting in the first time and said it's too long. And it's going to be 3 books and it'll be good. And then as I'm, after, making that decision, as I'm thinking about how I'm proceeding, I'm like, you know what, there's a 20-year gap between the first trilogy and the second trilogy that I've got. And a lot of important things really aren't covered in that. And I thought, well, it's not essential to the story, but I really want it there. And I don't have to argue with anybody. So the second trilogy that I'm working on, this is the first book in the second trilogy. This is TA NUPA. This is the first book in the prequel trilogy, which is called Shame. And so this second trilogy takes place 1 year before the main story begins. And it's the final setting the table of these different cultures, these different conflicts that I have come to care about. And I don't know if it's a good idea or not, but it's what I wanted to do. And I love the fact that I had that control.
Right. Well, anyway, that's what's beautiful about it.
Thing I've ever tried to do, and I've struggled with it. I'm a fast writer. I've been very slow. It's been a bad year for our family in a lot of ways, but it's been. But I don't know, I feel really fortunate at this point that I'm able to actually make my own decisions, because I'm tired of following the orders of people who make really bad decisions.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, that's beautiful. That's one of the things I've been careful of crafting my career now, is that I'm not opposed to traditional publishing, but I want to do hybrid. There's certain things that I'm just publishing, right? I'll publish some of the other stuff still traditionally, like I always have, but I want that control. It's like, no, this is a story about these like bootlegging pirates that sail down Ohio to sack this like crazy future Pittsburgh that's like social media on steroids, right? Like it's essentially Pittsburgh at that stage is social media now, right? Everyone's become their social media persona, in a real way, and they have to travel back to being a person.
Oh, I'm really. So I read your description of it on your site, and I'm like, totally want to read this book. So you write stuff that's totally serious and emotional and literary, but I love the fact that you want to do something satiric. I mean, this one, which I think is what I read from it at Buford. This one is absolutely just the satire, and I told the story there that basically I made a bunch of money on a contracting job, and my wife says, what are you going to treat yourself to? And I'm like, I'm going to take a whole month and I'm going to write an entire book that I will never have to worry about pitching to an agent because it's too weird.
Yeah.
The most fun project that I ever did, and I'm actually very proud of it. I think it's actually a pretty funny thing if you get into it. And
I haven't read it, but your reading was brilliant. That was so fun. It was so fun reading that.
I'm glad that turned out, because I've not read before that. And but this one is it's not so much about this book. It's about I think that the fact that we can look at this and say, well, this will never be published, right? This will never be a factor. I don't think it's because of the quality. I think it's because it's just too weird. It's just, and it's satirical, and some people really don't get satire, and a lot of them happen to be corporate vice presidents.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, it's hard because there was a time, right, where you would have Mel Brooks, and there was a lot of satire on TV. When I grew up,
yeah,
there was a ton of satire. Like
yeah.
I was born in 78. I grew up in the 80s.
Yeah.
All satire. It was Spaceballs, it was everything, right?
Yeah.
Whatever you loved. And I grew up at that time. So I loved G.I. Joe and Star Wars and all these things. And then they would mock them with Spaceballs. And I loved the mockery, you know?
Yes.
And now it's like Pirates is so far down the rabbit hole. It's like each side can like cancel me if they want, like when it comes out. And that's what I wanted. It was like I wanted a real satire. And there's going to be people that will say, and actually I have a Christmas collection and have it next to me, right? I'd hold it up, but A Fire for Christmas. And it's Christmas stories. And the conceit is it's these two writers that met right before the pandemic, and they're trying to rekindle. They had this like moment in the supply closet, and then the pandemic happens, and the guy doesn't contact her, and then finally starts writing her old-timey letters on his typewriter and sending her his stories. And so they end up sharing stories, and that's the collection is those stories that they share back and forth.
Cool. Yeah,
yeah, and it's really satirical. And there's people that love it, and then there's writers sometimes get very in their feelings because when he first writes, the guy's Jeff, he writes Lourdes D.P. Ivy, the acclaimed writer of holiday erotica. He writes her and sends her the story, and she's like, dude, I gave you my information, you haven't responded to me in months, like I don't want to look at this story, but here's 18 criticisms about your story sucks, you know. So anyone that's ever gotten that kind of thing, like you can see like the reviews, they'll be like, oh my gosh, she's so mean to him. But in the story, she's coming from an emotional place that she liked him and then didn't, you know. And so, but what's funny is there will be times where people say it's not satire. And they just mean they didn't find it funny.
Yeah. And
so it's like we've lost that sense that it's like, oh no, like it's you know, satire, I'm just embellishing things to make a point, right? I'm commenting on things by being like embellishing or exaggerating or just, you know, just being absurd to make a greater point about society or whatever we're talking about. But people, no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, the thing I love in satire sometimes is just the tiny little details, the throwaway details that carry something normal over into the absurd, right? That people won't necessarily notice, but it's the accumulation of them. I don't know if you are you a fan of Armando Iannucci, who does he's a Scottish, right? Armando Iannucci, so he's from Glasgow, right? Because that's the world we live in, right? The person that like helped develop the Alan Partridge thing over in England, and he did the BBC series In the Loop, or The Thick of It, which turned into a movie called In the Loop. And most Americans would know him through Veep.
Oh, Veep was amazing, yeah.
Yes, Veep, and a movie, a wonderful movie called The Death of Stalin, which is
okay.
God, it's just the darkest thing. And he's got a currently he has anyway, he's a master satirist, right? And the thing that I get every time that we watch him is how he gets the little things, the right. It is in a dark satire, just getting the details that show you the absurdity. That's the genius. And there's not enough of it. We live in a time when it's things are it's really kind of an existential moment, and or alternately, maybe we're just over dramatic, right? I don't think so, but we're humans. We're
I think it's some of both.
Yeah, we're monkeys with guns and money, and as I was saying today, we're also monkeys that we now carry around these little magic mirrors in our pocket.
We do. Oh,
and that really changes everything. The little magic
oh
here, it
yeah.
knows all about me.
Right. Especially trying to raise kids that are kind of the first ones raising with that magic mirror and not realizing you just handed them a magic mirror.
Yeah.
And
what's gonna happen?
Fuck all. Like, what did you like? You know what I mean? What did you release upon society? You know,
It's the biggest unregulated experiment in human history.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually wrote a piece about this today on Facebook, just saying that, you know, it's only unregulated in the sense that no one's accounting for the ethics of the construction of the experiment. Otherwise, the people that are getting the data from this experiment are using it to figure out how to sell us everything and to turn people, aggregate individual preferences into audiences that can be marketed to effectively.
Right. Yep. You know what it all goes back to is Jurassic Park, when Jeff Goldblum's character like talks about chaos theory. All of that's dinosaurs released. Like, you did this and you think you have these algorithms and you're controlling shit. No. None of us know. Like, we just released velociraptors.
and we're living with the consequences of that.
We are.
In a way that, I mean, basically, if you went back to 2014 and Armando Iannucci had done had made a satiric series about Donald Trump actually, you know, becoming president, we would have said, well, that's hilarious, but it's just not believable.
Right.
The thing that's frightening is how quickly we normalize all this absurd behavior.
Right. It is. So I started writing pirates. So it was, let's see, 12 years ago, if I'm counting right. And it's, and I've worked on other things, you know, since then. So, but I've been working on 12 years, and then the last 4 years, I mean, that's the thing I've been working on. And the idea of Trump wasn't there, but the idea of politics as the political debates are basically like WWE, like Hell in a Cell matches, you know, like that was already there. But the fact that Trump came along, I actually edited to, like, now there's an event in that happens preceding the novel, but that I added because of the whole like Trump escapade here, that there was the Trumpocalypse. And it's not about Trump, it's about Trumpism, you know, and just in general, this like crazy, just extremism on both sides going. And it's strange, like, especially when you write things that take a long time to get done, just how the world changes, and you're like, oh fuck, I gotta edit now, because that wasn't absurd enough. I'm not even being absurd anymore. Like, I'm normal. We're talking about hand size.
One of the things that I liked about your sort of structure is that, you know, that idea, well, what really gets you, what are you really angry about, right? And the thing that I had to think about that because it's such a long list, but I think that's the most personal for me is having been a journalist and having, you know, been out there getting dragged for saying this Fox News thing, which, you know, we didn't have Fox News before 96.
Right.
It's, to me, that is the dividing line, because it was very obvious that you had people who wanted to believe certain things, and that, you know, and that's one of the problems with the subsidy for news being advertising, because if you're giving the audience what they want, you're going to make more money. And Fox understood that, and they also understood the power of it. And so if you were out there saying, hey, look, these people are not doing ethical journalism, they're calling themselves journalists, but they're doing everything the opposite, because clearly they have this agenda. And at the time, I think I was very cautious in the way that I tried to criticize it, because you know, you're trying to be this objective journalist. And, boy, it was worse than I was saying, and I got dragged, man. I'm sure. Just, you know, not seeing it. Well, now we see it, and it's people talk about the opioid crisis, right, and having lost family members, right? Well, everybody, I'll just say this: if you're a white family in the South, you've lost family members to QAnon. You've lost family members to this notion that I got to carry a gun everywhere with me because so many Mexicans are coming across the border.
Right.
They're going to wind up, on our property trying to, just. It's
right. And can I just say for our audience living in California, and actually at one point I managed a manufacturing plant in Tijuana and needed to go constantly. Mexicans are awesome.
Yes.
It's not like, I get that you want some control of the amount of people that come in the country. Like, that's a different conversation. Like we make it out like everyone coming in is like a terrorist or a drug dealer. And most of them aren't. Most of them are trying to get a better life.
The thing
so you need to talk about that in some real way versus extremism on both sides.
The thing that makes me so angry is not that Southern white people got it going on, right? We've had bad ideas throughout our history, right? And we have some
Everybody has,
right? But when you look at the history of the United States, there are some very distinct things that you can point to, not just the Civil War, but a century of Jim Crow, essentially.
Sure. Absolutely.
You get the point. And I grew up in a South that there was a lot of emphasis on trying to get to a new South, which I think was best described as Jesus Christ meets the joints of Chamber of Commerce. That was pretty much the way it was. After Fox News, though, it took a change. It took a turn.
Sure.
It was devastating. I mean, to me, it is very comparable to the opioid epidemic in terms of people had conditions, underlying conditions. They were in pain. You give them this thing and they become addicted to it and their lives spiral downward.
Absolutely.
We allowed this to happen. We could have dealt with this in various ways. And it destroyed families. It's destroyed communities.
And all we didn't deal with it. So we just got the opposite. Yeah. So now you get the Fox News, which was really the start, right? Fox News got wildly popular. It radicalized a bunch of people one way. And then now you get MSNBC and you get all these other things that pose as journalism.
I don't think that's a 1-for-1, right? The question is not left or right, because I'm here to tell you, if you actually look at what the propaganda is about, which I obsess over, it's really not about politics. The political thing is an outcome of the message. The part that's what they're really selling is hopes and fears and resentment, grievance.
Well, mostly fear.
Mostly fear.
I mean, there's barely hope sold anymore.
But the upsell is you are good people. You are the ones that are trying to help the country. You have the best interests of everyone at heart if they would just listen. And that's the way it's presented. And it's so corrosive because it hits people on all their emotional centers, and it just eliminates all opportunity for a meaningful factual check on the things that pleasure and fear and we love that sense of being right and we hate that sense of being foolish.
And we all want to change the world, especially being young. You want to change the world, but you don't realize some of the world might be perfectly okay, right? You want to upseat your father, but maybe your father was like brilliant and like, I mean, like when you're younger, who the fuck's to say? This is biological urges propelling you to want to do these things. And we seem to have lost the just sense of, like, there was the old hero's journey, right? Like Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey. It used to be, okay, well, Luke Skywalker is on Tatooine and he wants adventure. And then the wise mentor enters the fray and there's a call to action, right?
Yes.
The wise mentor has been gone because the wise mentor is horrible, right? Yes. It's just everything before is horrible.
Yes. Yes.
And so really it's just people that are, I mean, you're just lost. You have no mentor, like you have no sense of the past. It's just that the past is all wrong.
No.
And you don't realize like what I've realized in my life so much, right, is that and I really try to have like whatever I write inform this, is that really most people are trying their best.
Yes.
Like, most people really aren't like monsters, right? Like most people aren't Hitlers, right? Like they're trying. And if you take a second and just realize, oh, they might just be misguided, or they might just, you know, they're maybe I'm misguided, and that, you know what I mean? Like you take that beat, and that beat seems to be lost. It's just try to get people to agree with you and find that echo chamber and
when you reduce everything to a binary, right?
Right.
The implication is that this is why I really fear the binary frame,
Sure.
right? The implication is that for every Fox News, there's going to be a liberal equivalent. Well, and just on down the line,
but,
right?
Right.
Think,
right? But and there's actually not, because
the facts or
no,
not, right? Can you be checked by fact?
Mm-hmm.
Are you accountable to evidence? And of course, that's where it's broken. And you know, living here in the South, I mean, that's every day. And since I look the part, right?
Sure.
You know,
right.
When I go out in public, people just start talking the crazy to me, like we're part of this.
Right.
And that leads to some very shocked people in the Ingalls parking lot. The grocery store parking lot.
Right.
Because I ain't no, we're not playing that shit.
Sure. Yeah. Well, you know, until I don't know if like it's getting dark here, but until prior to COVID, I've generally had short hair. Right. So, and I'm 6'1", I am fairly big guy, right? Yeah. Short hair, white guy, everyone thinks like I'm very into that. And they won't realize that, oh, I've always been like, you know, I remember in high school, like when I was in high school, the whole should, you know, gay people be able to marry, and like, is it even okay to be gay? That was still a thing. Yeah. And I always did a lot of drama. I had lots of like gay friends, you know, and I remember at different times, people saying something to me, you know, to them, and me like charging down the hallways and things, you know, the area I grew up. And so, but you wouldn't have known from the way it looked. So people would be very happy to do it. Now it's prior to the pandemic, like the hair has gotten like crazy now, because my wife decided, my son and I got our hair cut right before all the lockdowns in March, you know, 2020. And then it was getting long, and she's like, oh, I just don't know with everything going on. My wife is the class of a relationship. She probably won't watch this, so I'm gonna tell it straight to the audience. Way better. I married way out of my league. Yeah, and I take that. Yeah. That's a point of pride. Like, you want to marry out of your league. Like, like that, like you've scored.
Well, so there's two ways really to keep your hair if you're a man and you don't have money. One of them is you just let it grow out. Yeah, right. Sure. I've had very long hair many times. The other is that you do what we did in the Army, and you cut each other's hair. With clippers, right? And you save yourself back then. Good God, I mean, they were cheap as hell, but you know, we thought it was money. Sure. So you just cut each other's hair. Well, I basically had to, for years, I kind of I cut my own hair, and finally, you know, with the clippers, and you know, it's either long or it was going to be really short. And since we moved up here, my wife has a little time, and she's kind of artistic. I'm like, you're my new barber. Let me show you how I want you to do this. So. So I haven't paid to have a haircut now, and you know, I can't even remember. I mean, 7 years, maybe 6 or 7 years. And the thing is, I know we're a very materialistic country, right? And I know that it's almost a radical act to say, you know what, don't have money, chose not to have money, I chose to have something else. And I'm not a consumer in the way that I used to be, which I'm not trying to be a holier than thou person. I'm just trying to say that for the things that I want, this is excess baggage.
Yep.
And unnecessary food. That's a quote from the Tao Te Ching. The most conservative book ever written, as far as I'm concerned. If you've never read the Tao Te Ching, two verses or two chapters, verses, whatever, and very short. And it's if you look at it from a political standpoint, it is really about, if you think you can change the world and make it better, you're mistaken, right? So I'm very respectful of that, in the same way that I'm respectful of classic conservatism. Right? There's an element of that to everything. And to me, the value of writing this series about a world in conflict is that I can get out of the political world that I lived in as a journalist and that we live in as citizens, and I can write about the things that shape our conflicts without having to privilege one position over the other, right? Sure. Because it's so uptight now, right? Even the people who are doing bad things are often doing them, they're legitimately bad things. They may be doing them in their own mind for really noble reasons. That doesn't excuse it, but it's important to try to understand it. And the value of writing science fiction or fantasy, and I'll just say, since you don't really know, the idea of this fantasy world, and the reason that I didn't want to abandon it, is that it is set so, it's not necessarily on Earth, but it is set so far in the future where there have been so many global civilizations, in this case 3 civilizations, that have risen and been destroyed on top of each other and come back from that. Reasons are interesting. At least one reason is. And so the people who are living in the shadow of that, they understand that they're not the most advanced civilizations ever been on the planet, but they don't necessarily understand what came first, what came before. That's the subject of myth, and trying to sort all that out kind of crosses over. I mean, when you talk about the rules of what is epic fantasy, well, it has to have magic. Well, I hate most epic fantasy magic, right? I understand people want, they want elves and orcs, and they want wizards and fireballs.
They want Lord of the Rings, right? Like,
and there's nothing wrong with that. It's great. I don't need to write another
Lord of the Rings is awesome.
It's already written. So the rules of magic in my world are basically psychic rules. And I'm fortunate, I'm not a psychic myself, but I'm fortunate enough to have, spent a lot of time around people who truly are, Patricia Anthony, I was talking about her before. The reason that Patricia Anthony became unpopular, she wrote this incredibly moving novel, Flanders, I mentioned it before, where it's about soldiers in the trenches in World War I, dealing with the death of everyone around them. And this one person is a psychic, and he's able to help his dead friends make the move, across that transition from life to death. And Patricia was very clear that there is more to life, that we are more than meat, right? And I think that's true. I went looking for that. Go ahead.
It's a beautiful point. I just wanted to bring it up because one of the things I've thought about, especially just modern times, right, is I'm not religious, and I don't have any dogma that carries me along, but I do, and I've tried to pass this along to my son, and I think it's hard for the next generation, like, to kind of get this, is that I absolutely believe there's more. Like, there's so many great just reincarnation stories. Like, if you just Google that and just find some of the stories of people that are like, I had this life.
This is now the subject of actual academic study, serious academic.
Right. And it's amazing. Like, some of the evidence you have, you're a fool if you don't realize there's more than what we know. It's not.
If you're interested in this, I can send you some additional stuff.
Sure.
It's actually a remarkable time, because we now can resuscitate people who would otherwise have just been dead. So there are now billions of cases of people who were clinically dead. And the thing that's really astounding is just how the similarities of the stories that people tell about that experience suggest that something is going on. That doesn't mean there's life after death or yada, yada, yada. It's not putting anything on, but what it says is that past the point of time that the brain is functioning in a way that we can scientifically recognize, there is something going on.
Right. There's something going on, right? There's and I fear a lot of times, like just with recently, is that I feel like when you lose the sight of the fact that maybe we are eternal in some way, or even just recycled, right? If you're talking reincarnation, you start to really put so much emphasis on this life that the thought of someone suffering even for a minute becomes unbearable, right? Like you just can't stand it. Like a frog, like nothing can die because this is all they have. But when we had religion, and it had its, foibles, right? Like we had wars, right? We had crusades, we had things that like weren't the greatest, but at least it gave you a sense that you continued on and you didn't have to break down for everything that happened. Now it's, if someone suffers for a minute, we seem to think that's unbearable. Like you can't live. The Buddhists were correct.
Suffering comes from having a body, and here in the West, we struggle with that. So my father died this fall. We were not particularly close. My father, we became close. We became closer in the last few years. My father was he was a Protestant minister. He was a professor. He was a social activist. He was, in many ways, a mess of contradictions and problems. And he was clearly somebody, I mean, I can say this with confidence now. This is someone who desperately needed some kind of psychological care as a young person. And if he'd gotten it, he would have been institutionalized. So he got by as best as he could, but he was a pretty toxic person to a lot of people for a long time.
Sure.
And for me, and this is somebody who's counseling people as pastoral counseling, right? Which is a very dangerous kind of position to be in when you've got your own issues. And it took me until I was well into my 30s before I was able to really kind of deprogram myself out. And he was not a religious extremist, but I just grew up in the church, and I had the kinds of fears that Christian kids have. And it was very difficult for me to even sort of examine some of these alternatives. Anyway, fast forward, one of the things that I did when I got out of being an editor and I went over to the features department and I got to write whatever I wanted to do. I went to my boss and said, listen, Neopaganism is an interesting thing. There are active Neopagan groups in the Low Country in Charleston. No one's doing anything about them. I think they're fascinating. I propose to spend the next year, in between everything else I'm doing, I'm going to embed with these people. I'm going to learn what they do and who they are and what they're about. And I'm not going to write a word until we've spent a whole year together. And the guy was like, fine, just, keep delivering me other stories at this rate. So anyway, I did this, and it was probably the best thing I ever did in my life, right? Because I was curious. I was very curious about what they were, who they were, and what they were doing. And the interesting thing to me is that when you leave the newsroom, when you're a newspaper person, the newsroom is your life, and you think these people are your family. When my wife and I left in sort of difficult times, in difficult ways, we lost those friends. Most of them were not there for us ever again. But the people that I got to know during that year of spending time with these pagans in the Low Country, they're still our friends, and they are tremendously influential in the way that I think. I still am not I've never, I'm not ruling out magic in any way. One of the things that I write about in this series is the difficulty of being a person who is a person of the mind and uses rationality, and a person who is intuitive and uses psychic gifts and various to interpret the world.
Can I ask?
Very difficult to like have both at the same time. Go ahead, please.
Right. Yeah. No. Can I ask it in a general sense? Excuse me. Have you ever experienced anything kind of on the unexplained end? Like we're talking about like magic, but I mean ghosts, Bigfoot, whatever. Like just
yes. That's what I wanted, right? I wanted that as a rational person, right? What I wanted was evidence that I could that would satisfy me in the same way that it satisfied Patricia Anthony, who, by the way, lived in Dallas and was part of a group called the Wednesday Night Weirdos, who would get together, and they were mediums, and they would just kind of hang out, see if they could contact anybody that was having a hard time passing over after death, and they would try to help that person. And some of those stories are kind of make my spine jingle, right? I don't doubt her at all, but of course, how would you prove it? Right. I can say that I haven't had that, right? And so when you spend a lot of time with people who are in the, who are neo-pagan, what you get is a really mixed bag, like you would if you go to a Methodist church. You're going to get people who are there for all kinds of reasons, and some of them are nuts, right? That's absolutely true. Sure. But the ones that are legit, right? And this is what we do in life. I think you try to achieve legitimacy, and then you try to find other people who have legitimacy, right? And what's when that crosses over boundaries like this. And so I basically feel like I am comfortable. I mean, I identify myself as pagan. I don't know what that means entirely. What I do, all that means for me is that I don't have a religion that's based on an elaborate story that I have to remember, right? The Abrahamic religions, that's a story, right? The things that we think of as being pagan are not so much stories as they are observations about the natural cycle of the year, and myths get told to expand upon and explain those cycles, because all of those cycles are very applicable, at least unless you live at the equator, that's different, right? But if you live north or south enough that you have seasons, you see the same things repeating themselves, and you see all these commonalities, which, by the way, Joseph Campbell has a wonderful thing about, right? Where he talks about how the cultures that would meet once they learned each other's language would say, well, what do you call this god? They say, well, we have that too, but we call it this. And they would say, the impulse is the same. It's just different languages and different words.
Right. There was a book I read many years ago. I think it was Karen Armstrong, if I remember the name. It's called The History of God. And her premise was actually every religion started off as one God, all monotheistic. And they started to intermingle, and they respected each other. So they'd go over like, oh, this is your God. Oh, and then so that spread out. And so that's why, like early in history that we call it now, that there was a lot of religions with polytheistic, gods. Oh, here, there. But they all started as one God, and then they intermingled and they respected each other.
So I would say I would say that from more of a Western pagan perspective, because there's just so many perspectives, right? But from a Western European pagan perspective, that there's a lot of emphasis on, they're goddess worshipers, right? Well, the idea is that you have this idea in the West is the triple goddess, which is really this idea of it's funny because we have the triple, we wound up with in Christianity and the Abrahamic religions with this Father, Son, Holy Spirit, what's the Holy Spirit?
Yeah.
Right, that's kind of a question thing, right? It's a fun question to ask Christians because they don't always give you the same answer, right? The thing with there are aspects of this goddess because it's this idea of a thing that is eternal and unchanging, right? It has many aspects, right? The thing about the God in that story is the story of the wheel of the year. It's a story of birth, growth, potency, maturity, decline, and death. And in that story, that recurring story, the god died back on November 7th, right? At what the Celts called Samhain. And basically we have been in winter ever since November 7th. This is the dark night's winter. And in a week from tonight, when we're, having this conversation, it will be the darkest night. And by the first week in February, things will be brightening up again, right? That's winter. Okay. And that at the solstice thing is the heart of the mystery, right? In that the god is dead, the goddess is eternal, and then the goddess gives birth to it, on the darkest night, creates this new thing. Now you don't have to believe that, right? But it's a coherent story about life, death, and mystery, right? That is kind of universal in cultures that don't live near the equator,
right?
And so what I wanted to do with Shane, and so this is not a book about Wicca or anything, right? But it has this symbol right here. This is the triple goddess symbol, because I wanted to write from the perspective of a culture where this is not controversial,
right?
Where this is not a thing where we're fighting over it, or that's weird, right? It's just their way of navigating the world. And the thing that's nice about that, from my perspective, is that it's just when you have to, basically when you talk about these kinds of things, it makes people so uncomfortable because it's like you're making a claim. I'm not making any claims, right? I'm very happy that I get to live in this beautiful spot where I get to watch the year change all around me every day. And I see things here in the, in the fields, God, it sounds so pompous, but it's I've actually changed in 6 years by being here and by having I have an online presence, I have an online life, I have work and all this stuff, but every day, we're out in this. And if you follow that wheel, it's just, you kind of relax a little bit.
Sure. What do you think, in general, right? We've kind of touched on the entire world at this point. But to touch on pop culture a little here, because as we talk about just stories and mythology, the popular mythology now is superhero movies, right? Like that's what's taken hold of everyone. Seems like it's waning a little bit at the moment, but what do you make of just the proliferation and fixation on superhero movies and how that relates to just society in general at the moment?
Well, it's 100% about a business model.
Sure.
I mean, and it's a very sensible business model, right?
Right. But you have to have people that, to have that be the business model, you have to have customers.
Yes.
So there's customers that are signing up for the new Iron Man, and now it's not even Iron Man, right? It's new person that's Iron Man and new person that's Captain America. Like
right. It's a universe, right? But the thing about it is that I can't remember what I was doing that I came across this. My wife says, we're in the Look It Up Club. But when you have a question, you go look it up, right? And doing that becomes kind of a life discipline, right? Where you're just like perpetually curious about things and I want to know stuff. And so I don't know if you remember a movie that was kind of a Gen X movie, I guess, called My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
No, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, they made a sequel or whatever. And it's just a rom-com. It was made for nothing, and it made shit tons of money. When you even out the dollars in the when you count for, you know, what money is worth now and what it was worth then, some of these big blockbuster Marvel movies don't make as much profit as that one movie made, but they never lose money. And that's the thing, right? The business model is not that we're trying to get a big hit. The business model is every time we print, we make money. That was the newspaper industry business model, that we're going to, doesn't matter, we're going to make 40% profit. Nothing makes 40% profit for 100 years. They did. So when they stopped getting 40% profits, they didn't have a management culture that could compete, right? Because it was just like, oh, that's a great idea, Bob. You're the best. Right? That's how you got promoted in management past a certain level. And of course they died, right? They just panicked. That idea is the death of that business model is the death of creativity, right?
Sure.
And that's where we are as a, it's not necessarily where we are as a culture. That's where we are in terms of entertainment and art. And, you know, it's what we talked about earlier. If artists and writers make art with the sense that only special people like themselves can appreciate it, then you're dooming everybody else to this, to the mass-produced, to the kitsch, to the unremarkable, to the point where, I don't know if you're aware of what's going on with the audio editing problem, right? That it's very difficult now because of the way that blockbuster movies are made, and the way that sound systems in theaters versus sound systems on your television are set up. The reason you can't understand the dialogue in English in movies that you watch now, you have to turn on the subtitles even for English stuff, is because they can't figure out how to market it or how to mix the audio. And in the end, what they've decided is, for a lot of these movies, that, you know, the audio, the script, not that important. It's the big explosions and shit. And that's kind of where we are as a country. I mean, as a culture. And I don't think it's sustainable. Can't prove it. I think it's going to fail. As we say here, I suspect but cannot prove, because there's a lot of, I don't want to say definitively, because I have, you know, when it comes to me making predictions, it's pretty much on the level of flipping a coin. That's my trap.
Yeah, and that's all of this, right? But no, I agree with you.